"Excuse me, but I believe you are seated in our seat." The words cut through the air like a muffled thunderclap, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the narrow aisle of the plane. Dr. Charlotte Brennan didn't look up immediately. She was finishing an email on her cell phone, reviewing the final details of her presentation for the National Medical Congress in Chicago. She took a quiet sip of water, breathed deeply, and only then did she look up. The man before her, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, burly, impatient with the crumpled ticket in his hand, was watching her with growing impatience. "Excuse me?" Charlotte asked, in a firm, polite tone, but without giving in. "Our seat," he repeated, his voice deep, his finger pointing to the number printed on the ticket. 2A, see, this is ours." She remained calm. A small smile formed on her lips. "There's been a mistake, sir. Seat 2A is mine." She held up her phone and showed the screen displaying her digital boarding pass. "Charlotte Brennan, seat 2A. The certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. For a moment the aircraft's murmur seemed to disappear, and the aisle became a silent stage where the power of a simple phrase redefined who truly had the right to be there. Before we continue this story, please comment on which city or country you are watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. This is just the first twist in a story that will surprise you. The man's wife, Vivian Whitmore, platinum blonde, with diamonds gleaming under the soft cabin light, let out an audible, impatient sigh. "Oh, for God's sake, Gerald, let's not make a scene. Call the commissioner right away." But she didn't want just any commissioner. She wanted an employee, someone who could get things done, someone who would restore what for her was the natural order of things. Because, in the sterile and air-conditioned world of first-class travel, certain rules are printed on the tickets, and others, older and more silent, are etched in the cold gaze of privilege. For Dr. Charlotte Brennan, her ticket was clear. Seat 2A, window, Celestial Premium cabin on SkyNation Airways Flight 842. But for the elegant and influential couple who were now looking at her with discomfort, that detail was irrelevant. They only saw a black woman and decided she didn't belong there. Charlotte was exhausted. The last 72 hours had been a marathon of rigorous inspections in the SkyNation Airways hangars at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, a technical and arduous dive into the inner workings of modern aviation. At 42, she had dedicated 15 years to the FAA, rising from systems engineer to senior airworthiness inspector, a position that demanded precision, steady nerves, and unusual emotional resilience. That night, she finally boarded a plane to London, where she would be the keynote speaker at the International Aerospace Safety Congress. All she wanted was 7 hours of peace and quiet, sunk into the soft leather of seat 2A. He had reserved that seat 6 months in advance, partly with miles, partly with his own money. A small luxury, rare and well-deserved. Normally, he was content with regular business class, but the week leading up to the Congress had been brutal. She needed to arrive rested, clear-headed, and ready to represent the country. The road to get there had never been easy. A graduate in aerospace engineering from MIT, Charlotte faced years of veiled resistance, and sometimes resistance that wasn't so veiled. Her eyebrows were arched when she entered the meetings, the paternalistic tone of someone who thought she was there to take notes, not to command. The kind suggestions were for her to seek more suitable areas. But Charlotte persisted. 8 years earlier, she had lost her husband David in a cargo plane crash. The official report stated that the error was due to pilot error. But Charlotte's personal investigation uncovered serious maintenance failures. Neglected and covered up by the airline, the company reached a quiet agreement. The FAA has changed protocols, and Charlotte discovered her true mission: to ensure that no other family would go through the same pain. Today, she was a single mother to Lauren, a brilliant 21-year-old student at MIT. The two spoke via video call every week. The night before, Lauren had wished her mother good luck, and with a radiant smile, told her that she had been selected for an internship in aeronautical engineering. "You're paving the way for me, Mom," he'd said. "Every time they underestimate you and you prove them wrong, it gets easier for those who come after." Those words still echoed in Charlotte's mind. As she settled into her seat, feeling the cool leather against her back, she stored the leather briefcase containing her notebook and lecture notes in the overhead compartment and her bag under the seat in front of her. She wore tailored navy blue dress pants, a cream silk blouse, and a dark grey blazer that conveyed authority without arrogance. Her neatly styled braids fell over her shoulder, a frame of serenity and strength. Anyone observing her would realize she knew exactly where she belonged. The celestial premium cabin of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was a cocoon of quiet comfort. The LED lighting alternated between shades of lilac and amber, designed to reduce fatigue. The air mingled the scent of Joe Malone's white tea perfume with that unmistakable smell of a new aircraft, metal, leather, and a promise of distance. All around, the boarding process continued its choreographed chaos, suitcases, murmurs, muffled voices. But in that small space between luxury and unseen tension, Dr. Charlotte Brennan knew it wasn't just a flight. It was yet another battle, subtle, silent, for the right to fully exist in any seat in the world. The crystal glasses clinked softly as the pre-boarding sparkling wine service began. "Still water, please," requested Dr. Charlotte Brennan, declining the toast. She wanted to keep her mind clear for her trip to London, where she would be the keynote speaker at the International Aerospace Safety Congress. While she waited, her thoughts drifted back to an incident in Denver 4 years earlier. She had arrived early for a national conference, with her credentials and speaker badge in hand, only to be directed to the service entrance by an employee who couldn't reconcile her appearance with her position. "The speakers enter through the main door," he had said, assuming she belonged to the support staff. Calmly, Charlotte showed the name tag that bore her name in firm letters, "Keynote Speaker." The man's face quickly shifted from astonishment to embarrassment, and then to the defensive discomfort of someone who prefers to blame others for their own prejudice. It was a script Charlotte knew well, repeated in many versions throughout her career. "Dr. Brennan?" The soft voice of a flight attendant interrupted his recollections. Jessica Thornton, as indicated by the name tag attached to her uniform, was standing next to her seat. "I noticed you declined the sparkling wine. Would you prefer still water or perhaps some tea before takeoff?" Jessica had a calm and professional manner, thoughtful without being condescending. That was rare, and Charlotte noticed. "Water would be great, thank you." "Of course. Are you traveling for business or pleasure?" asked the flight attendant, pouring the water into a thick glass. "Business. I'll be giving a talk in London at the Aerospace Safety Conference." Jessica smiled genuinely. "That sounds important." "Yes, indeed. We're going to present new protocols for inspecting composite aircraft structures. Nothing too light-hearted for dinner, but essential for keeping airplanes where they should be, in the air." The flight attendant chuckled softly. "If it's to keep the planes safe, that's a very good reason for me." As soon as Jessica stepped away, Charlotte opened the tablet. The presentation title flashed on the screen: Proactive Implementation of Airworthiness Directives, Bridging the Gap Between Regulation and Operational Practice. It was a dry but vital subject, and as always, she reviewed every detail. His concentration was interrupted by a harsh voice. "Excuse me, but I believe you are in our place." The man spoke with the impatience of someone who had never had to wait. Gerald Whitmore, 58, was the type of businessman who entered any room confident that the world would adjust to him. The founder of Whitmore Capital Group, he had transformed a regional fund into a financial empire. His grey hair was meticulously trimmed to disguise his baldness, and his tailored suit painstakingly concealed the little belly that the personal trainer had already declared gone. Beside him, Vivian Whitmore, 52 years old, platinum blonde and impeccable, exuded calculated luxury. The diamonds gleamed under the yellowish light of the cabin, reflecting the cost of a life lived to be seen. The necklace was a birthday present, and, discreetly, an apology for her husband's second extramarital scandal, which had graced the pages of Vanity Fair magazine. They moved through the celestial premium cabin of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, like someone inspecting property, assessing passengers with quick glances, recognition for the equals, disdain for the others. Gerald examined his leather ticket holder with the gold initials, then looked up at Charlotte, frowning. Vivian had no patience for subtleties. His gaze swept Charlotte from head to toe, from her elegant braid to her understated shoes, lingering on the dark skin of the woman in front, before dismissing her with a disdainful smile. "Our seats," Gerald repeated, raising the ticket as if it were a pronouncement. "2A and 2B, we always travel together. I reserved these seats in advance." Charlotte kept her voice under control, but felt the tension rising in the back of her neck. "As I mentioned, sir, this is my reserved seat." "Perhaps you reserved the third row?" His face paled and then quickly turned red. "I know what I've reserved. I've been a Diamond Plus client for 15 years. He said it in the tone of someone announcing a title of nobility. "Then perhaps we should confirm with the commissioner," Charlotte replied, gently but firmly. He knew his reservation was correct. He had checked it 3 times. Part of a custom that had earned him respect in the FAA and distrust from those who couldn't stand seeing a black woman in a position of authority. Gerald's jaw clenched. He looked at the commissioner with an irritated gaze, as if searching for an official to put things in order. "Jessica, can you come here, please?" he called impatiently. "We're delaying boarding," sighed Vivian, adjusting Tory Birch's scarf with fingers as polished as her words. Behind them, first-class passengers were already crowding around, watching in silence, some curious, others uncomfortable. And there, in that corridor illuminated by shades of amber and lavender, the air seemed denser. More than a dispute over seats, it was a perfect reflection of what Charlotte had known since the beginning of her career. It wasn't her place that bothered others. It was the fact that she belonged to him. A grey-haired man, in an impeccable suit and gleaming Swiss watch, impatiently checked his wrist. The younger executive beside him was furiously typing on his cell phone, probably complaining about the boarding delay on some social network. In the row ahead, Gerald Whitmore raised his hand and snapped his fingers twice, the dry sound cutting through the air like an order disguised as a request. It was the gesture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Commissioner, we need help here." Jessica Thornton, who at that moment was helping an elderly lady put her purse in the overhead compartment, lifted her face with the professional smile of someone who had seen it all, but who wasn't letting it get her down. "I'll attend to you shortly, sir," he replied calmly, finishing his task first. Her choice, prioritizing the elderly passenger before rushing to attend to the businessman, was enough to make Gerald clench his jaw. The discomfort turned to irritation. He turned to Charlotte, his gaze filled with arrogant certainty. "This will be resolved in an instant," he said, with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted. "You can start getting ready to pack your things." Dr. Charlotte Brennan took a deep breath, took a slow sip of water, and felt the cold liquid soothe the tension rising in her throat. The scene was too old to cause surprise. The assumption was that she was in the wrong place, that her presence there was an exception to be corrected, not a right to be respected. "Sir," she said in a firm and polite voice, "I'm not going anywhere. This is my reserved seat. I chose it in advance, checked in online, and confirmed everything yesterday. If there's any mistake, it wasn't mine." Gerald opened his mouth to retort, but was interrupted by the arrival of another flight attendant, not Jessica, but a younger blonde woman with a practiced smile and a name tag that read Meredith Caldwell. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone soft but already tinged with anticipation. "Yes," replied Vivian Whitmore, hurrying ahead before anyone else could speak. "That person is sitting in my husband's seat. Our seats are 2A and 2B. For a brief second, Meredith's professional smile faltered. Her gaze swept over Charlotte, assessing her tanned skin, braided hair, and understated blazer, and judgment preceded reason. "Madam," he began in a sweet but firm voice, "could you show me your boarding pass?" Charlotte showed her cell phone with the QR code. The screen was clear. Charlotte Brennan, 2A, Sky Nation Airways. Meredith frowned for a moment, checked Gerald and Vivian's ticket, and noticed the duplication. It was a simple mistake, a duplicate reservation, something resolved with a check in the system and compensation to one of the parties. But Meredith didn't see a mistake. She saw an obstacle. "It seems there's been a slight mix-up in the system," she said, addressing the Whitmore couple while casting a sideways glance at Charlotte. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it immediately." Turning to Charlotte, she added with a forced smile, "Madam, we have an excellent seat available in our premium business class. It's very comfortable, and that way you and Mrs. Whitmore can sit together." It wasn't a request. It was an order disguised as a kindness. Charlotte was told to move, not because there was a technical error, but because they believed she was the one who was out of place. The couple was the fixed center. She was the mistake to be corrected. "No, thank you," she replied with a cutting serenity. "I'm very comfortable here. This is the seat I chose and paid for. If there's a duplicate, I'm sure they can find another one for the couple." Meredith's smile vanished. "Madam, we need to resolve this quickly so we can leave on time. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore are Diamond Plus customers. The system should have protected their seats." The message was clear. Status was worth more than justice. "I'm also a Diamond Plus client," Charlotte said, without changing her tone. "But that doesn't matter. The fact is, this is my seat, and I'm not moving." Vivian let out a loud, deliberately theatrical sigh. "This is absurd. Gerald, do something." Gerald puffed out his chest and leaned over Charlotte, invading her space with his usual weight. "Listen here," he said in a deep, slow voice. "I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play, or if you got that ticket with some employee discount, but we're going to sit here." He leaned in even further. "Are you going to stand up on your own? Or do you want me to call Commander Richard Hartwell to come here and sort this out personally?" The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. The passengers nearby began to murmur, their curious eyes discreetly drifting towards seat 2A. Some pretended not to see. Others watched in silence, uneasy, as if they were facing something bigger than a simple booking error. And Charlotte, motionless, felt the familiar weight of that tension, that of proving once again that she belonged exactly where she was. Charlotte Brennan felt an old, weary anger begin to simmer silently in her stomach, a sensation all too familiar. It was the same weight he carried in board meetings, academic conferences, technical inspections, and now, inside the Sky Nation Airways Celestial Premium cabin, it was the weariness of someone who needs to prove day after day that they belong in spaces that others believe are theirs by birthright. "That won't be necessary," she said, looking firmly at Gerald Whitmore, then shifting her gaze directly to Meredith Caldwell, the blonde commissioner who insisted on treating her like a problem. "I've already given my answer. I'm not giving up my seat. If there's a mistake, it should be corrected, but without me relinquishing what is rightfully mine." Meredith's face hardened, her professionalism turning into coldness. "Madam, if you refuse to cooperate, you will be disobeying the crew's instructions. We may have to disembark you." The final card had been played: come down or be taken away. Charlotte observed the three faces in front of her. Gerald's air of superiority, Vivian's icy disdain, and Meredith's bureaucratic hostility. They had made their assumptions, drawn their lines, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Anger gave way to a glacial calm, the kind of serenity born of duty, not emotion. "Very well," she said, her voice low and steady, each syllable cutting through the air of the cabin. "I think it's time to call in Commander Richard Hartwell." The murmur in the cabin ceased almost instantly. The impasse was already attracting curious and uncomfortable glances. In the fourth row, a dark-haired, middle-aged man in a simple suit and with an attentive gaze observed the scene. The name tag around his neck identified him as Marcus Powell, chief engineer at an aeronautical technology company. During boarding, he had exchanged a brief nod with Charlotte, the kind of silent gesture that two people accustomed to resistance recognize from afar. Now he shifted in his seat, torn between the instinct to intervene and the fear of becoming a target himself. Moments later, Meredith returned accompanied by an older woman with a firm expression and experienced gaze. Sandra Pearson, the cabin chief. The way she walked revealed that she had mediated many conflicts before. "What's the problem here?" he asked, addressing the three sides. Before Meredith could justify herself, Charlotte spoke with the precise calm of someone who knows the facts. "There appears to be a duplicate reservation for seat 2A. I made the reservation months ago and confirmed it yesterday. Mr. Whitmore believes the seat is his, and his colleague asked me to move to premium business class without even checking the system. Neither of them received the same request." Sandra's gaze shifted from Charlotte to Meredith, who stiffened defensively. "The Whitmores are Diamond Plus clients," Meredith hastened to say, with a tone of barely disguised obedience. "They always travel in the front row." "I understand," Sandra replied slowly, "but we need to confirm the reservation dates before making any decisions." She removed the tablet from its stand and began to type. The silence that followed seemed thick, heavy. Gerald Whitmore snorted. "That's absurd. I've flown over 3 million kilometers with Sky Nation Airways. I'm a personal friend of the company's president. This whole situation is a disrespect to my loyalty." Vivian, realizing that the commissioner's authority would not yield immediately, decided to raise her voice. "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to someone so hostile," she declared loudly, making sure half the cabin could hear her. "She's making a scene." Charlotte turned her face slowly towards her, her gaze steady and calm. "I'm just sitting in my seat, ma'am. If anyone is causing a scandal, it's not me." "Did you see that?" Vivian said theatrically, addressing Sandra. "That aggressive tone, that's unacceptable." The accusation was so absurd that Marcus Powell, still watching from the fourth row, let out an audible groan. Meredith looked at him with a silent warning, but the damage was already done. Other passengers began exchanging glances and whispers. An elderly lady across the hall crossed her arms and cast a look of pure disgust at the Whitmore couple. Sandra Pearson looked uncomfortable as she reviewed the information on the tablet. Suddenly, he looked up. "I see here that Dr. Charlotte Brennan reserved seat 2A 182 days ago, and Mr. Whitmore 73 days ago." The air seemed thin. "That's beside the point," grumbled Gerald impatiently. "We are Diamond Plus clients. Our status should guarantee priority." "Not even Diamond status cancels previous reservations, sir," Sandra replied with a cutting serenity. "It seems the system didn't flag the duplicate booking, but priority remains with whoever booked first." Vivian crossed her arms, incredulous. "Then fix it. Move it to another location." "I can't do that, ma'am," Sandra said firmly, now with a slight weight of authority in her voice. "Dr. Brennan has the earlier reservation. I can offer you another seat in row 3, identical, in fact, to the one you requested." "Unacceptable," interrupted Gerald, his voice louder, now a mixture of anger and embarrassment. But it was too late. The tension that had previously been whispered had become visible, and for the first time on that flight, the eyes were no longer on Charlotte. They were turning on him. In seat 2A, Charlotte Brennan simply leaned back, silent, composed, like someone who no longer needs to prove anything. She knew exactly where she was and why she wouldn't leave. "I have a health problem that requires me to sit in the first or second row. I need legroom. It's in my nature," declared Gerald Whitmore with theatrical confidence. Charlotte Brennan stifled a sigh. She highly doubted there was any medical problem. It reeked of wounded pride disguised as a special need. But she remained silent, watching as he concocted a convenient excuse. Noticing Sandra Pearson's hesitation, the cabin chief Meredith Caldwell saw the perfect opening. "Perhaps Dr. Brennan would be willing to give up her seat as a courtesy," she suggested, her voice mellifluous and rehearsed. "We can offer compensation, of course." The words were chosen with cruel precision. There was no longer talk of rules, reservations, or priorities of fidelity. The talk was of courtesy, of asking a black woman to yield, to step aside from her rightful place in the name of the comfort of a wealthy white couple. "I refuse," Charlotte replied simply, calmly and definitively. Vivian Whitmore let out an audible whisper. "How stubborn! Some people just want to prove a point." Charlotte slowly turned her face, her gaze fixed and penetrating. "And what exactly would that point be, Ms. Whitmore?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Vivian blushed, but did not answer. Sandra, realizing that the tension had reached its limit, took a deep breath and decided to act. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I can offer you seats in the 3rd row or 2 individual seats in the 1st and 2nd rows. These are the options available at the moment." Gerald's face flushed red with anger. "Is this how you treat your best customers? Call the commander, now." Sandra hesitated, but finally nodded to Meredith. "Inform Captain Richard Hartwell that we have a situation in the premium cabin." As Meredith quickened her pace toward the cockpit, Gerald leaned dangerously over Charlotte, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Charlotte stared at him without blinking. "Neither do you, Mr. Whitmore." The distance between the cockpit and the Celestial Premium was no more than 10 meters. But for Captain Richard Hartwell, it seemed like a grueling journey. Delays were the #1 enemy of any pilot. Every minute at the gate was a point less in his punctuality statistics, and he lived for those metrics. The crew's message was vague. Dispute over a seat in the 2nd row involving Diamond Plus passengers. In over 30 years in aviation, Hartwell had seen it all. And in most cases, situations like this involved someone who felt entitled to something they hadn't paid for. He emerged from the cabin with impeccable posture, his uniform pressed, his grey hair combed with military precision. His expression was one of authority and impatience. Meredith Caldwell found him in the hallway, relieved. "Commander, thank you for coming. The Whitmore couple, our Diamond Plus customers, had seat 2A duplicated due to a system error. The doctor there refuses to change it. The cabin chief offered premium business class, but she is making it difficult." Hartwell followed Meredith's gesture with his eyes. He saw Charlotte, calm, sitting by the window. He saw Gerald and Vivian standing there, the former with a flushed face and the latter tapping his foot with studied impatience. A white, elegant couple, accustomed to being in charge, and a black woman alone, calm but firm. Like many before him, Hartwell allowed silent bias to fill in the gaps. His posture straightened, authority activated. "Mr. Whitmore, Commander Richard Hartwell, I apologize for the inconvenience. We experienced a system malfunction, but I assure you that you will be comfortably seated within a few minutes." The promise was clear. He had already chosen a side. Then he turned to Charlotte, and his voice lost its gentleness. "Ma'am, I'm the aircraft commander. From what I understand, there's been some confusion regarding your seat." Charlotte held the gaze. "There's no confusion whatsoever, Commander. This is the seat I reserved months ago. It seems there was a duplication in the system, something your team should resolve with the Whitmore couple." Hartwell's jaw clenched. The firm response irritated him more than he would admit. "My crew has already offered you an alternative in premium business class. We can even add a credit voucher as a gesture of goodwill." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her tone serene but implacable. "A gesture of goodwill would be to honor the ticket I paid for. Reassigning me to a lower class due to a company error is not goodwill, Commander. It's punishment." He paused, his voice lowering, more controlled, but impossible to ignore. "I'm traveling to London, where I'll be speaking at an aerospace safety conference. I need the space and comfort of this seat because that's what I chose and paid for. It's only fair that I receive what was promised." The silence in the cabin was absolute. All eyes were on her, and for the first time, even Commander Hartwell hesitated. It wasn't just a dispute over a seat, it was a mirror, and in his presence it was clear who was truly right. "I'm not going to upgrade to premium business class." Charlotte Brennan's voice cut through the air in the booth like a steel wire. Calm, precise, unwavering, her serenity seemed to infuriate Commander Richard Hartwell more than any outburst of anger would have. It was the calmness of someone who knew they were absolutely right, and that certainty challenged his absolute authority within the aircraft. In the hierarchy of air travel, a captain's word is law. Hartwell had already removed drunken passengers, rowdy students, and arrogant businessmen without ever losing sleep over it. But something about the woman's serene demeanor, the firmness in her eyes, the control of her voice, made him hesitate. For a moment a flash of doubt crossed his mind. And it was in that silent interval that Charlotte remembered other battles fought with the same calm, from a conference in Denver when security was called because she tried to enter the speaker's VIP room, from a connection in Washington, D.C., where the attendant assumed she was lost in the first-class area, from a meeting at the FAA where they confused her senior engineer badge with that of an administrative assistant. On all those occasions she maintained her dignity. Every time she won. And now he knew. This was just another battlefront in the same silent war. "Madam," said Commander Hartwell, lowering his voice, now firm and inflexible. "Let me be clear. This aircraft is under my command, and FAA regulations dictate that passengers must obey the crew's instructions." He paused briefly so that everyone could hear. "The lady was instructed to change seats. Her refusal to do so constitutes a safety issue. She is interfering with the crew's duties and preventing the safe departure of this flight." The phrase security issue came as a blow. It was a deliberate escalation, an attempt to transform an administrative error into a crime of obedience. The cabin sank silently. The whispers ceased. Eyes turned. It was no longer a simple dispute over a seat. It was a power struggle. Vivian Whitmore seized the moment, her voice heavy with cold pleasure. "Did you hear what he said? You're jeopardizing flight safety. They're going to kick you out of here. That's what you deserve." Charlotte didn't even turn around. His eyes remained fixed on the commanders. She knew that game. It was the tactic of those who used their authority to humiliate, to force submission. But she also knew the regulations, perhaps even better than he did. "Commander Hartwell," he said, his voice calm but full of conviction, "are you really invoking FAA regulations on crew interference to resolve a seat allocation error made by the airline itself?" The sharp tone caught the commander by surprise. He swallowed hard, but maintained his composure. "I'm explaining the consequences of your actions," he retorted grimly. "You have two options. You can accept the seat in premium business class, and we all continue our journey. Or you can refuse, and I will have to request your removal by airport security." He paused dramatically, his eyes fixed on her. "The choice is yours. You have 1 minute." The ultimatum hung like a death sentence, to submit to injustice or be publicly humiliated. Behind him, Gerald and Vivian Whitmore exchanged satisfied glances, restrained smiles of triumph. Meredith Caldwell, the part-time commissioner, nodded with a tense expression as if she saw the hierarchy weighing on the wrong side. The power of an entire airline, its uniform, its rules, its authority, was now turned against a single woman. Through the half-open cockpit door, First Officer Nathan Keller, the co-pilot, watched the scene with growing unease. At 36, still new to international routes, he had learned to admire and fear Hartwell's iron fist. But what I saw there wasn't discipline, it was abuse. The passenger in seat 2A didn't seem rebellious. She was calm, articulate, and clearly knew SkyNation Airways procedures. Using security as a pretext to remove it seemed, at the very least, dishonest. First Officer Keller tried to signal with his eyes, suggesting that the commander return to the cockpit, but Hartwell ignored him. After a second, Nathan discreetly stepped back, leaving the cabin door slightly ajar, just enough to continue listening. Charlotte glanced away toward the small, oval window. Outside, the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson courtyard buzzed under the orange lights of the floodlights. Ground technicians swarmed like ants around the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, preparing the aircraft for its overnight flight to London. It was a world she knew intimately, not the glamour of the cockpit, but the technical heart of aviation, the metallurgy of turbines, the pressure of hydraulic systems, the precise interplay between mechanics and electronics, and above all, the FAA regulations, the invisible code that separated safety from tragedy, the same code that the commander was now using as a weapon to humiliate her. She took a deep breath, feeling the dry, cold air of the cabin fill her lungs. The anger dissipated. The frustration disappeared. What remained was something much more solid, determination. The captain was about to discover that on that aircraft, the passenger in seat 2A knew the rules as well as he did, perhaps even better. All that remained was a cold, distinctly purposeful feeling. Commander Richard Hartwell had given her an ultimatum. Now, it was her turn to give hers. "Your minute is up," he said, glancing at his watch for emphasis. "What is your answer, ma'am?" Charlotte Brennan looked away from the window, her eyes meeting his. The slight, polite smile had disappeared. In its place, there was a firm, professional expression, that of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The passenger had left the scene. The senior FAA inspector had just started her shift. "Commander Hartwell," she began, her voice shifting in tone, gaining a controlled, almost institutional resonance. "Before responding to your ultimatum, I have some questions regarding the airworthiness of this aircraft." The word echoed through the cabin like thunder. A wave of confusion swept across Hartwell and Meredith Caldwell's faces. The Whitmore couple exchanged uncertain glances. Their triumphant expressions faltered. The conversation had changed course so abruptly that no one knew how to react immediately. "Airworthiness," Hartwell repeated disbelievingly. "Madame, this aircraft is a brand new Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It is perfectly safe." "I'm sure of it," Charlotte replied, in a neutral, almost clinical tone. "But perfection in design doesn't prevent maintenance errors. I'd like to confirm the approval of the hydraulic actuator for the right outer flap. A replacement was recorded this morning." "Nice!" Can you confirm that the final torque verification was signed off by a second certified engineer and recorded in accordance with FAA Directive 14, CFR Part 121.803? The silence that followed was almost palpable. The commander's arrogant confidence vanished in seconds. Meredith's eyes widened, completely speechless. That wasn't the language of a disgruntled passenger. It was the precise, technical jargon of a civil aviation specialist. Gerald Whitmore, catching his breath, snorted sarcastically. "What is she talking about? This is absurd. Get this woman off the plane." Charlotte did not take her eyes off the commander. "The directive is clear, Commander. Following incidents involving failures in 7A79 series actuators, the FAA requires dual signature verification for any hydraulic component replacement on primary flight control surfaces. And by coincidence," she continued without changing her tone, "I reviewed the maintenance report for this aircraft, registration N787SK, this morning during a routine audit. I noticed the actuator replacement, but I didn't see the second required signature." Hartwell's face lost its color. She knew the aircraft's registration number. I knew about a specific maintenance action that had been taken a few hours earlier, and he was quoting a technical guideline from the FAA from memory. The balance of power, so painstakingly built up in the final minutes, was silently crumbling. Who are you, ma'am?" stammered the commander, his authoritative tone turning to disbelief. "My question first," Charlotte replied without hesitation. "Was the double signature verification performed correctly?" Hartwell's mind began to spin. He remembered seeing the note in the technical log during the pre-flight inspection, but couldn't recall whether he had verified the second signature. Like most commanders, he relied on the maintenance release system. If the plane was cleared for flight, it was because everything had been done correctly. But now, for the first time, he doubted. "I need to check the maintenance log," he admitted, his voice lower, his tone less confident. "Please do it, I'll wait," Charlotte replied with a cutting serenity. The dynamics of the cabin have changed in an almost tangible way. The Whitmores seemed confused, trying to understand at what point they had lost control of the narrative. Meredith recoiled, visibly pale, and Marcus Powell, the engineer who had been observing from the fourth row, was now watching everything with fascinated attention. The woman in seat 2A was definitely not who everyone thought she was. Hartwell hesitated for a second, then turned to Meredith. "Get the aircraft's technical registration, now." As the flight attendant hurried toward the cockpit, Gerald Whitmore's patience finally ran out. "This is absurd," he exclaimed, his voice loud enough to echo through the cabin. "We are being held hostage by some woman talking about things nobody understands. I demand that she be removed immediately." His authoritative tone cut through the air and made some passengers flinch. A baby started crying in row 5. Hartwell, still stunned, turned with military rigidity. "Sir, please lower your voice. We are handling the situation." "Dealing with her?" roared Gerald, his face now deep red. "You're giving in. Do you know who you're talking to?" "Gerald, that's enough," Vivian whispered, discreetly tugging at her husband's sleeve. There was something in the commander's tone and in Charlotte's icy gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. Something was changing. And, for the first time since the beginning of that flight, the powerful no longer had control. That was no longer the controlled aggression of an executive accustomed to intimidation. It was a pure, uncontrolled fit of rage. And it was drawing exactly the kind of public attention the Whitmore couple usually paid dearly to avoid. "I'm going to call the company's CEO right now," Gerald Whitmore yelled, waving his cell phone in the air. "I want to see what the president of Sky Nation Airways will think of this absurd treatment." Charlotte Brennan remained silent, observing the collapse with an almost clinical detachment. She had seen this before, the despair of those who grew up believing that privilege could correct any wrong. At that moment, Meredith Caldwell reappeared, holding a bulky folder, the aircraft's maintenance log. She handed the document to Commander Richard Hartwell, who began to leaf through it nervously, his hands trembling slightly. "Page 42, Charlotte indicated, with the same cutting calm of someone dictating a sentence. "Replacement of the hydraulic actuator for the right external flap. Technician in charge, Jenkins." The commander found the page. The expression on his face hardened even further. The primary signature was there, but the secondary verification, required by FAA Directive 14 CFR Part 121.8203, was missing. He swallowed hard. "There seems to be a discrepancy," he murmured reluctantly. Charlotte looked up. "A discrepancy, Commander?" he repeated, his voice as cold as steel. "This is a regulatory violation. Without the dual signature, this aircraft is not airworthy." The words fell heavily like a verdict. The impact was immediate. Hartwell felt the blow, not physically, but morally, technically, professionally. If she was right, and everything indicated that she was, the flight could not legally take off. But who was that woman to say that with such certainty? "Madam, I appreciate your concern, but—" "Commander Hartwell," Charlotte interrupted with a tone of unquestionable authority. "Perhaps it's time to clarify who I am." She leaned forward calmly, opened her leather bag beside the armchair, and took out a small, discreet black wallet. From inside, he pulled out a laminated document bearing the golden emblem of the FAA. She raised it to the commander's eye level. The cabin was completely silent. "My name is Dr. Charlotte Brennan," she said slowly. "I am a senior airworthiness inspector with the FAA's Technical Compliance Unit." With each word, the air seemed to grow thicker. "My job is to ensure that every aircraft I set foot on is in full compliance with American safety standards. For the past 72 hours, I have been leading a surprise audit of Sky Nation Airways maintenance facilities at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport." She paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. The background noises disappeared, the clinking of glasses, the muffled hum of conversations. Everything fell silent. Every eye in the cabin was on her. "When you and your commissioner threatened me with forced removal due to an administrative error by the company," she continued, looking directly at the commander, "I was still just a passenger. But when you invoked FAA regulations to try to intimidate me, you turned the matter into a professional issue, and at that moment you came under my technical jurisdiction." The sharp click of the wallet closing echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. "So, Commander Hartwell," she said, her tone sharp but restrained, "I'll ask again, can you personally attest that the double signature verification on the hydraulic actuator was performed correctly? Because if I can't, my log entry remains valid. And that means, Commander, that this aircraft is not authorized to fly." The silence became absolute. The air felt too heavy to breathe. Vivian Whitmore stared wide-eyed, unable to process what she was seeing. Gerald, the same man who minutes before had been shouting orders, now looked like a deflated doll, his mouth opening and closing in silent spasms. Meredith Caldwell, the commissioner who had suggested that Charlotte give up her seat out of courtesy, paled. He raised his hand to his mouth, as if trying to stop his own regret from escaping. Hartwell, the proud commander, felt cold sweat trickle down his temple. He had threatened the wrong woman. She had tried to use the rulebook as a weapon, but she was the one who had written it. The ultimatum he had given minutes before now sounded distant, ridiculous. Because inside that plane, there was only one real authority, and she was sitting with impenetrable serenity in seat 2A. In the cockpit of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, where professionalism and protocols usually prevail, the tension was almost palpable. The checklist lay silently, ignored on the dashboard, and for the first time in many years, Captain Richard Hartwell realized he was not in control of the flight. Commander Richard Hartwell staggered back into the cockpit. First Officer Nathan Keller looked up from his pre-flight checks, noticing his superior's paleness. "What happened, Commander? The ground agent is calling, asking why we're late." Hartwell sank into the captain's seat, wiping his sweaty face with a hand. "Close the door," he murmured. The metallic click of the door isolated the sounds from the passenger cabin. Nathan obeyed, his gaze tense. "Okay. What happened?" "The fight for seats," Hartwell replied, his voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "The woman from 2A. The co-pilot frowned. "What's wrong with her?" Hartwell stared at him with deep eyes. "She's from the FAA. Nathan's eyes widened. "From the regional office?" "No," Hartwell replied, the word coming out with crushing weight. "Worse." He took a deep breath, as if he were short of breath. "Airworthiness Technical Compliance Unit. She spent the weekend auditing our maintenance workshop in Atlanta. He knows the aircraft's registration number and is asking about the replacement of the right flap's hydraulic actuator that was done last night." Nathan's face paled. Every pilot knew the reputation of that unit. The FAA's airworthiness inspectors were the technical equivalent of a special force. These were the professionals you never wanted to surprise and never wanted to irritate. Having a senior inspector on board, precisely on the flight where the captain had threatened her, it was the kind of nightmare that could end a career. "The logbook," Nathan said quickly. "Was the double signature recorded?" "No," Hartwell replied, with a sigh that bordered on despair. "I'm a pilot, not a mechanic. I saw the green light on the dashboard and trusted that maintenance would be authorized. I signed the aircraft acceptance form based on the maintenance manager's instructions, but she, the doctor, says the second signature isn't there." Nathan's eyes widened. "If she's right, Commander, we're violating an active FAA directive. Flying like that is a serious infraction. It's an automatic suspension." "Call maintenance now," Hartwell ordered, trying to regain control. "Call Jenkins, the night shift supervisor. I want the physical record, not the digital one. Ask them to verify that the second signature is indeed missing." Nathan picked up the radio, his voice trembling but steady. While communicating with the maintenance department, Hartwell took a deep breath and faced another unavoidable task. "I needed to notify the Sky Nation Airways Operations Control Center. The connection was quick and painful." On the other end, the director's cold, impatient voice echoed through the headphones. "Let me see if I understand, Commander. You are being held at the gate with the plane full of passengers because of a dispute over seats that has now turned into a potential flight suspension order issued by an FAA inspector that you tried to remove from the plane." Hartwell swallowed hard. "That is the essence of the situation." The silence on the other end was deafening. When the response came, it was filled with pure managerial fury. And whose idea was it to confront that passenger? The commander did not respond. The question hung in the cabin like a silent verdict. Meanwhile, outside the reinforced door, tension spread through first class. The Whitmores were still standing, but their arrogance had now given way to a mixture of fear and confusion. Gerald was still gesturing, trying to get an explanation from the commissioner, but Meredith Caldwell wouldn't look at him. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on the ground. Every word she remembered echoed with guilt, every condescending tone, every impatient gesture, every time she had treated Charlotte Brennan as someone out of place. She hadn't just been rude, she had disrespected a federal authority. And now, with each passing second, he realized the magnitude of the mistake he had made. In seat 2A, Charlotte remained serene. The open laptop in front of her displayed a detailed technical diagram, lines, codes, and diagrams for hydraulic systems. She seemed absorbed in her work, but nothing escaped her notice. She saw the furtive glances, the whispers, the cell phones discreetly recording. Through the contained panic of the crew, the tension in the air, and, more than anything, I felt profoundly tired. That situation should never have happened. His authority was not meant to humiliate, but to protect. But they had forced her to act. So, when Jessica Thornton, the flight attendant who had served her water at the start of the flight, she approached cautiously and gently, and Charlotte greeted her with a genuine smile. "Dr. Brennan," Jessica said softly, "may I offer you something? Water, coffee." "The water I have is perfect, Jessica, thank you." She emphasized the commissioner's name, which was written on her name tag, a simple but human gesture, something that everyone else had lacked that morning. "I'm just waiting for confirmation from the commander." "Regarding the aircraft's compliance status," Charlotte concluded calmly. Jessica nodded respectfully, and for the first time on that flight, someone understood. That woman was not a threat. She was the guarantee that everyone there would arrive alive at their destination. "We've been informed that there's a technical delay, Doctor," Jessica Thornton said, her voice low and respectful. "We'll make an announcement to the passengers shortly." "That would be prudent," Charlotte Brennan replied, turning her serene gaze back to the laptop screen. The minutes dragged on, heavy as lead. In the cockpit, the radio crackled. A tense, hoarse voice came through on the internal frequency. "Commander Hartwell, this is Jenkins from maintenance." The tone was enough to chill the blood of anyone who heard it. "Talk to me, Jenkins." "There was a problem, sir. The digital maintenance record was closed by the junior technician. He checked the second signature box, but Supervisor Lawson was called away for an emergency on the Boeing 777 and never signed the physical document. The torque check was done, but the documentation is incomplete." A long pause. "Technically, Commander, the record does not comply with FAA Directive 14 CFR Part 121.803. The silence in the cockpit was sepulchral. They were there illegally. "Doctor, Charlotte Brennan was right, and she had identified the error with a single expert glance. The company's entire internal security system had failed, and only she, a seemingly ordinary passenger, would realize it." Richard Hartwell closed his eyes, feeling the crushing weight of reality. It was over. His authority had not merely been undone, it had been annihilated. He had threatened a woman who was infinitely more qualified than him because of a misunderstanding that he himself did not understand. And in the process, it exposed a serious security flaw at Sky Nation Airways. With a trembling hand, he picked up the microphone from the cabin's sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Commander Richard Hartwell speaking. We apologize for the extended delay. We are currently undergoing a technical verification procedure on the ground. We currently have no scheduled departure date. Thank you for your understanding and patience." His voice sounded empty, lacking its usual authoritarian veneer. In seat 2A, Charlotte heard the announcement and simply nodded slightly. The first phase had ended. Now the consequences were beginning. The generic announcement did little to quell the growing unease. Passengers in Celestial Premium Class knew very well that this was no simple technical problem. They had witnessed the confrontation. They had seen the FAA insignia and the despair that spread among the crew. Messages began circulating in WhatsApp groups and social media. An FAA inspector stopped the flight. The arrogant couple tried to take her seat. The entire plane is grounded because of this. The story spread like wildfire. For Gerald and Vivian Whitmore, the scene had turned into a public nightmare. They remained trapped in the hallway, the same one they had blocked minutes before, surrounded by disapproving glances. The flight attendants, once solicitous, now looked away with silent disdain. "This is an outrage!" roared Gerald, his voice echoing through the cabin. He walked to the back, where Rachel Montgomery, Chief Commissioner, was discreetly coordinating the team. "I want to know what's going on. Why are we still here? And why hasn't that woman been taken away yet?" Rachel turned slowly, her eyes as cold as steel. "Sir, the delay is due to an ongoing safety inspection. And that woman, as you say, is Dr. Charlotte Brennan. senior inspector with the FAA. I suggest you return to your seat and maintain discretion." "A federal employee?" Vivian scoffed disdainfully. "This must be another one of those quota filler hirings. He's loving the momentary power." The venomous comment caused a nearby passenger to flinch in indignation. Jessica, who was preparing the drinks cart, almost dropped a glass. Before Rachel could respond, a new figure appeared in the doorway of the aircraft, a man in a navy blue suit, breathing heavily and with a serious expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," he said firmly, "I'm Kenneth Torres, base manager for SkyNation Airways in Atlanta. I need you to come with me, please." "Finally, someone sensible," grumbled Gerald. "This situation is ridiculous. I demand compensation, and I want to speak with—" "Right now, you are interfering with a federal inspection," Torres interrupted, his tone implacable. "I ask that you accompany me immediately." The manager's gaze left no room for discussion. The couple exchanged glances, their faces suddenly pale, and walked silently towards the exit. Before stepping off the boarding bridge, Vivian cast one last icy glance toward Dr. Charlotte Brennan, who remained impassive in seat 2A. With the Whitmores out of the aircraft, Kenneth Torres approached her seat. He bent down, resting one hand on the aisle, in a rare gesture of professional respect. "Dr. Brennan," he said in a low, sincere voice, "on behalf of SkyNation Airways, I apologize for everything that occurred on board." And at that moment, the entire hierarchy was reversed. The woman they had tried to humiliate was now the only person on that plane who held the power to make it fly, or keep it on the ground. Kenneth Torres, SkyNation Airways base manager in Atlanta, was breathing heavily as he approached seat 2A. "Dr. Brennan, on behalf of SkyNation Airways, I want to express my deepest apologies for what just happened. The crew's behavior was unacceptable, and I have ordered an immediate investigation." Charlotte Brennan slowly raised her eyes, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Torres, your company's customer service policies are not within my purview. My concern is with the violation of FAA Directive 14, CFR Part 121.803. "Yes, of course," he replied quickly, visibly nervous. "Commander Hartwell has already informed me. The maintenance supervisor is coming with the physical records." "That won't be enough anymore," Charlotte interrupted with surgical calm. She closed the laptop and rested her hands on it. "The problem isn't just in the documentation, it's structural." An essential signature was omitted, and the aircraft was released without double-checking. And the commander admitted that he relied solely on the green light from the instrument panel without verifying the technical records. The blood drained from Torres' face. "Doctor, Mr. Torres," she interrupted firmly. "As the highest FAA authority present at this location, I have no choice. The failure is not an isolated incident. It's institutional. I need to ensure that this is not a systemic problem across your entire maintenance base." With precise gestures, Charlotte opened a secure app on her phone and typed quickly. "I am issuing a formal ground stop order for this aircraft. Registration N787SK. It should be immediately removed from service and moved to a maintenance hangar under the direct supervision of the FAA." Torres' face paled, but she wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice cold and firm, "the suspension extends to all Boeing 787 Dreamliner model aircraft, flights operated by SkyNation Airways from this base. Each one of them will be fully audited, and no flights will depart from Atlanta until all maintenance records are cleared. The documents from the last 48 hours have been verified and signed accordingly." Torres blinked, incredulous. That was the equivalent of a total fleet blockade, a logistical and financial disaster. "Dr. Brennan, Charlotte, please," she stammered, her voice faltering. "Isn't there another way? It was just a mistake, a technical detail." She stared at him for a moment, and the answer came like a blow. An error on a primary flight control surface is not a minor detail. It is a threat to human life. My duty is to protect passengers, not your company's financial balance sheet. With a final touch, she pressed the send button. The order was transmitted, and within seconds, the FAA system would confirm it. In the cockpit, First Officer Nathan Keller stared at the instrument panel screen, stunned. A notification was flashing in red letters. Immediate stop order. FAA ATL 23147 aircraft affected. Sky Nation Airways Boeing 787 Dreamliner Atlanta base. Reason technical compliance verification. Directive 14 CFR Part 121.803. Authority Brennan C. Senior Airworthiness Inspector Commander Hartwell let out a hoarse sound. Half nervous laughter, half despair. My God, this is real. She paralyzed our entire fleet. And he has the authority to do so, Nathan replied without taking his eyes off the screen. The directive is clear. Without double signature, the plane will not fly. And now, no one else either. Hartwell took a deep breath, the weight of the catastrophe falling on his shoulders. He picked up the microphone, his voice trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Commander Richard Hartwell speaking. We just received an official order from the FAA. This flight is cancelled. We will return to the boarding gate, and everyone must disembark. Sky Nation Airways teams at the terminal will assist with rescheduling. We sincerely apologize. The sound of a bus being torn apart echoed through the cabin. Murmurs, protests, and indignant glances multiplied. But in seat 2A, Charlotte Brennan remained calm. She closed her phone, smoothed her blazer, and stood up slowly. The battle was won. Public safety was guaranteed. But the consequences were only beginning. In the cabin, Hartwell stared intently at the notification on the screen, knowing that this would be the end of his career. The message treated him like a digital epitaph. Warning. Immediate ground stop. FAA order. ATL 23147. Authority Brennan.C. Senior Airworthiness Inspector. He lowered his head, feeling the weight of defeat. Outside, the entire plane remained in absolute silence. And for the first time since the start of that flight, everyone understood exactly who was in control. Commander Richard Hartwell's professional life flashed before his eyes like a fast-forwarded film. Decades of flawless flights, formal praise from management, the respect of the crew, all of that now seemed poised to dissolve because of a foolish mistake, born of arrogance and a hasty decision. "I've never seen anything like it," Hartwell murmured, his gaze lost on the blank dashboard. "I've dealt with hydraulic failures, electrical failures, passengers fainting mid-air. But this—" "She wasn't being difficult, Commander," replied First Officer Nathan Keller, his voice calm but firm. "She was simply defending her own right to the seat." Hartwell turned slowly, glaring at the co-pilot. But Nathan did not back down. "I'm just telling the truth, sir. Before we knew who she was, Dr. Brennan was just a passenger being treated unfairly. We were the ones who turned the situation into a disaster." The words hit the commander hard. For years, he had become accustomed to being the ultimate authority on the plane, but he had forgotten an essential lesson. Authority without justice is abuse, and abuse has its price. Hartwell ran his hands over his face. "I need to call the union," he murmured, picking up the phone. Nathan hesitated, then replied with what they both knew to be the truth. "This is no longer a union issue, Commander. The violation is real. And there's a whole booth of witnesses who heard you threaten an FAA inspector for not giving up your seat to an elite couple." The phone froze in midair, suspended between the commander's trembling fingers. The brutal and inescapable reality hit him. This was not an isolated incident. It was a systemic failure, and he was at the center of it. "And you, Nathan?" she asked with genuine desperation. "What would you do in my place?" The co-pilot took a deep breath. I would start by admitting everything. Failure to maintain, the misconduct with the inspector, the misuse of security protocols to resolve a seating dispute. So, I would cooperate with the FAA research until the end. Hartwell nodded slowly, feeling the unbearable weight of the truth. His career as he knew it was over. The most he could do now was try to minimize the damage. I need to inform the crew, he said, straightening up. As he opened the cabin door, the noise of the angry passengers and their suspicious glances hit him like a whirlwind. It was time to face the consequences. Sky Nation Airways, maintenance base, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport chaos reigned in the basement of the maintenance facilities. Chief Mechanic Victor Jenkins, a veteran with over 20 years in aviation, paced back and forth, the portable radio crackling in his hand. I want all the Boeing 787 Dreamliner records from the last 48 hours on my desk now, he roared, his voice echoing through the metal hangar. The technical center, normally an environment of precision and silence, now resembled a war room. Screens showed Sky Nation aircraft on the ground, all with their status indicators in red. 7 jets, each valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, are grounded until further notice. Jenkins ran a hand through his grey hair, his face tense. How did this happen? He murmured. The hydraulic actuator was a common component, routinely replaced. The service had been performed correctly, but the final verification signature had disappeared. I found the original operating system, shouted Emily Carter, a young technician, bringing in a bulky folder. Look at this. Supervisor Derek Lawson was called to an emergency on the Boeing 777 before he signed the form. Technician Ryan marked the process as pending on FAA link, but the system cleared the plane anyway. Jenkins flipped through the papers quickly. The sequence of events fit together, and it was the type of failure the FAA feared most. Not one major collapse, but a chain of small oversights that combined paved the way for tragedy. The system should have blocked the release until the double signature, he said, furious. Look here, Emily replied, opening the tablet. Someone manually reversed the block. They entered an authorization code. Jenkins leaned forward and read the number, and his blood ran cold. That was his code. I never authorized this, he murmured. But the memories started to come back. The chaotic shift, the delays, the pile of forms he signed without checking. Storms had delayed the entire fleet. The pressure for punctuality was brutal, and in the midst of that turmoil, he had done the unthinkable. Signed, without review. The echo of Inspector Charlotte Brennan's voice seemed to resonate inside his head. An error on a primary flight control surface is not a minor detail. It's the difference between life and death. Jenkins sat down slowly, his face in his hands. He didn't need anyone to tell him. He already knew. The fault lay not only with the system, nor with the commander. It was his too. And on the other side of the airport, at the boarding gate, the woman he had unknowingly helped to humiliate, he had just saved everyone's lives. If Victor Jenkins had actually authorized that release without confirming compliance with FAA Directive 14 CFR, Part 121.803, he could have put hundreds of lives at risk, and if he had done so, the responsibility would have been entirely his. The door to the Sky Nation Airways Maintenance Center at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport slammed open violently. The operations director, Margaret Reynolds, stormed in like a storm, her heels echoing on the metal floor, her face hardened with anger. Jenkins, what the hell is going on? I have 7 Dreamliner aircraft grounded, and President Alexander Grant is in my ear demanding answers. Jenkins stood up, his expression serious and resigned. We no longer meet a dual signature requirement in an airworthiness directive for the 787 Dreamliners. The FAA inspector, who was on board one of the flights, identified the fault. Margaret blinked, incredulous. An FAA inspector on board a commercial flight. How did that happen? She was not on duty, Jenkins explained. She was an ordinary passenger, but when they tried to remove her from the cabin because of a seat error, she identified herself and pointed out the compliance problem. Margaret put her hand to her forehead, trying to process the information. Are you telling me that our commander picked a fight with an FAA inspector disguised as a passenger, and that she discovered a real technical flaw that went through all of our internal controls? That's exactly it, Jenkins replied, his voice heavy. This is a nightmare, Margaret murmured, approaching the status panel in the center of the room. 7 aircraft grounded. 7 jets parked on the tarmac, with red lights flashing on the maintenance monitors. How long could this suspension last? It depends on the inspector, he replied. We will have to audit the entire fleet, review every maintenance record, and await her approval. At best 24 hours, at worst, a week. Margaret took a deep breath, her tone now hard and to the point. Listen, all of you. The dozens of technicians and engineers stopped what they were doing. From now on, this is the top priority. I want triple verification of all records. Each airworthiness directive must be compliant and documented. If there are any anomalies, I want to know before the FAA does. Understood? A unanimous chorus echoed, Yes, ma'am. Margaret turned back to Jenkins and lowered her voice. You know there will be accountability, right? Jenkins nodded, the weight of duty etched on his face. If it is proven that I signed the release form without verifying the signatures, I assume full responsibility. It's not just you, she said, her tone more serious. This shows a failure in the safety culture. From the coach who ignored the warning to the captain who tried to intimidate a passenger, who, ironically, was the one who understood the most about safety on that plane. Jenkins took a deep breath. Let's solve the problem first. Then we can assign blame. But deep down, he knew that nothing would be the same after that, neither for him, nor for the company, nor for anyone who had crossed paths with Dr. Charlotte Brennan. Sky Nation Airways headquarters, crisis meeting. In the glass-walled conference room of the board of directors, the silence was absolute. 10 executives stood motionless around the long, polished table. The CEO, Alexander Grant, gripped the speakerphone tightly, his knuckles white. Please repeat, Margaret. Lee. On the other end of the line, Margaret Reynolds' voice sounded steady but visibly tense. Around 3:40 p.m., Dr. Charlotte Brennan, Senior Inspector for the FAA, issued a formal grounding order for the entire Sky Nation 787 Dreamliner fleet in Atlanta. The decision was made after identifying the absence of a duplicate signature in a hydraulic actuator replacement in violation of Directive 14, CFR, Part 121.803. Alexander closed his eyes. And how exactly did Dr. Brennan end up analyzing our maintenance records while traveling as a passenger? An awkward silence filled the line. She was in Celestial Premium class, in a reserved seat. There was a booking error. The Whitmore couple, elite Diamond Plus clients, he claimed the seat was theirs. Margaret paused before continuing. The crew, including Captain Hartwell, attempted to relocate the inspector to premium business class. She refused. When the situation escalated, the commander invoked safety protocols and threatened to remove her from the aircraft. Alexander rested his elbows on the table, his jaw clenched. So, just to be clear, our commander threatened to remove an FAA inspector from a Sky Nation Airways flight. Why did VIP clients want her seat? Yes, sir. And what was she doing in Atlanta? Conducting a surprise audit at our maintenance base 3 days ago. Silence returned, heavy with emotion. A silence of 1,000 meanings, the kind of silence that precedes the downfall of an entire company. Alexander Grant finally spoke. "Get ready. It's not just an operational crisis. It's a national crisis of confidence." On the other end of the line, Margaret swallowed hard. She knew he was right. At that moment, Sky Nation Airways ceased to be an airline with a technical problem, and it became the epicenter of a scandal that would put all of American aviation under scrutiny. Alexander Grant, CEO of Sky Nation Airways, had wide eyes burning with a cold, controlled rage. "So, tell me if I understood correctly," he began, his voice sharp. "A senior FAA inspector who has been auditing our maintenance procedures in Atlanta for the past 3 days, was a passenger on one of our flights, was forced out of her seat due to crew error, discovered a real safety violation, and has now grounded our entire Dreamliner fleet at our main hub." Across the table, Margaret Reynolds, the chief operating officer, confirmed with a nod. "Exactly, sir." Alexander let go of the edge of the table and slowly leaned back in his chair. "Who authorized the attempt to remove her from her seat?" The in-flight services manager, Meredith Caldwell, made the decision. Commander Hartwell supported it. And where are they now? Meredith has been removed from her duties while the investigation is underway. The captain is finalizing the cancellation of Flight 315. Alexander turned to Laura Bennett, the company's legal director. "From a legal standpoint, what are we facing here?" Laura did not hesitate. "Serious. In addition to the operational impact, there is the risk of a discrimination complaint. A black federal employee was asked to give up her rightful seat to a white couple from the Elite Diamond Plus program. This has a very strong symbolic weight, and images of the situation are already circulating among passengers." "Problematic?" murmured James Whitaker, Vice President of Communications, with a bitter half-smile. "This is a public relations disaster. If the videos leak, and they will leak, we will be accused of institutional racism, and in the current scenario, a crisis like this could destroy the company's reputation." Alexander nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. "And what about the operational impact?" Sarah Mitchell, Vice President of Operations, consulted the tablet in front of her. "The grounding of Boeing 787 Dreamliners in Atlanta is affecting 23 flights in the next 24 hours, impacting approximately 4,200 passengers. We are trying to rebook customers on other routes, but hundreds will need to spend the night in the city." She paused. "The estimated loss is between $25 and $30 million, depending on the length of the suspension." The silence in the room was almost palpable. Alexander took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "This is what we will do." He stood up, his tone calm but decisive. "First, both Meredith Caldwell and Commander Hartwell will be suspended with full pay until the investigation is complete. Second, I want our best technical team working around the clock to review each aircraft and ensure full compliance with FAA Directive 14, CFR, Part 121.803. Third, Laura, please contact Dr. Charlotte Brennan directly. Issue a formal apology and offer full cooperation with the investigation." He paused and looked at everyone. "And fourth, and most importantly, we are not going to contest anything, neither the shutdown nor the FAA's conclusions. We acknowledge our mistakes. We will correct them and turn this into a milestone in rebuilding our safety culture." A murmur of surprise swept through the room. Alexander Grant had never been known to back down in the face of crisis. He was the type of leader who confronted strikes, regulators, and unions with the same steely gaze. But now, faced with an FAA inspector who had simply done her job better than all of them, he knew that resisting would be institutional suicide. The finance director hesitantly broke the silence. Alexander, with all due respect, this total surrender could cost us dearly, very dearly. The worst thing would be to fight against the obvious, the CEO replied without raising his voice. Challenging a federal inspector with solid technical evidence would be seen as arrogance, and arrogance is what got us here. He stood up and ended the meeting. We built Sky Nation on two pillars, safety and respect. We failed at both. Now our priority is to correct, not to hide. Understood. The executives nodded silently. Great. I want a complete dossier on Dr. Charlotte Brennan by the end of the day. I want to know who she is, what she has audited, and what her history is with the FAA. As the directors began to leave the room, Alexander remained motionless, looking out the window at the aircraft apron in Atlanta. Outside, 7 Boeing Dreamliners were parked side by side under the setting sun. In his 30-year career, he had already faced fuel crises, recessions, strikes, and even global pandemics. But nothing compared to that. A moral and technical disaster caused by sheer arrogance. Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of skin color or the number of miles on the card. That thought struck him like a blade, and for the first time in a long time, Alexander Grant felt ashamed. The couple, Gerald and Vivian Whitmore, were escorted to a private room, a space normally reserved for high-end clients. But at that moment, the atmosphere was suffocating, more like an interrogation room. Gerald paced back and forth, his leather shoes squeaking on the light-colored carpet. His usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by nervousness and disbelief. His wife, Vivian, watched in silence, her fingers gripping the purse in her lap. For the first time, they began to understand the weight of what they had caused, and that in trying to humiliate a black woman, they had only revealed their own pettiness. Vivian Whitmore sat rigidly in one of the comfortable leather armchairs in the Sky Nation Airways VIP lounge at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport Terminal, clutching her Louis Vuitton bag to her chest as if it were a shield. "This is absurd," Gerald Whitmore repeated for the 20th time, pacing back and forth. "Completely absurd. I've been flying with this company for 20 years, spending a fortune with them, and this is how they treat me, like some common criminal?" "Roberto, please, sit down," Vivian hissed, trying to maintain a shred of dignity. "You're only making things worse." The door opened, and Kenneth Torres, Sky Nation Airways base manager in Atlanta, entered with an impassive expression. His impeccable suit and the leather briefcase in his hands contrasted sharply with the emotional chaos in the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," he began, sitting down calmly behind the desk, "thank you for your patience." "Patience?" Gerald scoffed, laughing humorlessly. "We were held hostage by an incompetent team and an attention-seeking public official. I demand an immediate explanation." Kenneth's gaze remained steady, but a trace of ice crossed his expression. "What's happening, Mr. Whitmore? Is this one of our most respected passengers, Dr. Charlotte Brennan, Senior Airworthiness Inspector for the FAA, was harassed and threatened with removal from her properly reserved seat. All because you insisted the seat was yours, despite having made the reservation later. We are Elite Diamond Plus members," thundered Gerald. "Our seats should be protected. Elite Diamond status does not supersede federal regulations, domestic policies, or the bare minimum of human respect, Mr. Whitmore." Kenneth's voice now cut like a blade. "Dr. Brennan was in her rightful seat. She was polite, professional, and composed, and in return was treated unacceptably by the crew and, above all, by you." Vivian intervened, her voice thin and nervous. "That woman was provocative. She could have simply changed seats, but she chose to assert herself." Kenneth stared at her with professional detachment. "Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Brennan had no obligation whatsoever to give up the seat that she paid for and reserved. The mere fact that you believe you should have it for convenience says a lot. He opened the folder on the table and took out some papers. I have here accounts from crew members and passengers describing your behavior. Do you want me to read some of the comments? Vivian looked away, pretending to examine her nails. I figured not, Kenneth continued, closing the folder. Now, listen carefully. Flight 842 has been cancelled. Not only that, but the entire Sky Nation Airways Dreamliner fleet was grounded in Atlanta by the FAA after Dr. Brennan identified a serious safety flaw discovered during the confrontation you caused. Gerald's face paled. But this has nothing to do with us. It all makes sense, Kenneth retorted, his voice as firm as steel. If you hadn't demanded her seat, if the crew hadn't tried to force her to move, if Commander Hartwell hadn't threatened to remove her, she would have remained just an ordinary passenger. The technical flaw still existed, but it would have been discovered through normal channels, not in a public confrontation that cost millions of dollars and damaged the company's reputation. He slammed the folder shut with a dry snap. Therefore, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, due to the abusive and disruptive behavior demonstrated by both, which led directly to a federal security action, Sky Nation Airways is ending its relationship with you. Gerald was stunned. What are you saying? Your Elite Diamond Plus status is revoked immediately. You have been added to our list of prohibited passengers. The tickets will be refunded. And now, I ask that security escort you out of the terminal. You can't do that, Gerald shouted, his face flushed. I travel millions of miles. You can sue whoever you want, Mr. Whitmore, Kenneth replied wearily. But you'll have to explain to your lawyers and the press why you chose to humiliate an FAA inspector. I'm sure it will be a fascinating read. The mention of the FAA silenced Gerald instantly. Understanding finally hit him like a punch. It was no longer about status, miles, or privileges. It was about reputation, credibility, and potential federal charges. Kenneth opened the door, where two uniformed security guards were waiting. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore to the exit. Vivian stood up, her eyes brimming with suppressed anger. This is not over. In fact, it is over, Mrs. Whitmore. Kenneth's response was cold and definitive. As the couple was escorted out, a silence hung in the room, the kind of silence that follows a disaster waiting to happen. And outside, in the enormous Sky Nation Airways Operations Center, screens flashed incessantly with red alerts and emergency calls. It was total chaos. But for the first time in many hours, someone was finally in control. The sun was already setting over Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, tinging the aircraft apron with a melancholic amber glow. That would be remembered as the day Sky Nation Airways stopped, not because of a mechanical failure, but because of something much deeper, the moral bankruptcy of a culture of power and privilege. In the hangars, technicians and engineers worked tirelessly, reviewing every record, every signature, every screw. The Dreamliner fleet, the company's pride, now lay motionless under the weight of the twilight lights and corporate shame. In the makeshift press room at the terminal, President Alexander Grant prepared to make the most difficult announcement of his career. His normally serene face betrayed a sleepless night. Around him, cameras, microphones, and dozens of reporters awaited the moment when the company would break its silence. When the clock struck 6 p.m., Grant stood up, straightened his jacket and said, "Good evening. Today, Sky Nation Airways faced one of the most challenging days in its history. One of our FAA inspectors, Dr. Charlotte Brennan, identified a serious safety flaw in one of our aircraft, and in doing so, prevented hundreds of lives from being put at risk. Therefore, on behalf of the company, I express my deepest apologies to Dr. Charlotte, the crew, the passengers, and the American public. We failed." A murmur echoed through the room. The president took a deep breath and continued. But the failure wasn't just technical, it was moral. Our team, ground staff, crew and command allowed prejudice, arrogance and privilege to prevail over respect and dignity. And it was a woman, a black American woman, an exemplary professional who reminded us what responsibility truly means. Those words resonated beyond the room. In hangars, in newsrooms, on social media, Grant's speech spread like a wind laden with lucidity and shame. Meanwhile, in a simple hotel near the airport, Dr. Charlotte Brennan sat alone, gazing out the window. Outside, the movement of the planes continued, indifferent and majestic. She had turned off her cell phone. There were messages from the press, the FAA, colleagues, even congressmen. But for now, all she wanted was silence. On the bed, the blazer neatly folded. On the table, his laptop, still open to the page for FAA Directive 14 CFR, Part 121.803, the same one that had saved a flight and brought down an entire cog in the machine of arrogance. She sighed. She knew she wasn't a hero. He was simply someone who refused to back down in the face of injustice. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Jessica, the flight attendant who, amidst the chaos, had offered her a glass of water with genuine respect. "Doctor, excuse me for bothering you. I just wanted to say thank you for not remaining silent." Charlotte smiled slightly. "Thank you, Jessica." To remind us that kindness is also a form of courage. Jessica got emotional, and before leaving she asked, "They said that Mr. Grant will meet with you early tomorrow morning. Is that true?" "Yes, they want to review new protocols and perhaps rethink the training of the entire crew." "About time." "About time," Charlotte repeated, looking again at the illuminated track. The following morning, Hangar 4 at Sky Nation Airways was packed. Engineers, pilots, mechanics and flight attendants were summoned to an extraordinary meeting. In the center, Alexander Grant, flanked by Margaret Reynolds and a face that was previously little known to most. Dr. Charlotte Brennan, standing serenely, her FAA badge hanging over her grey blazer. The president took the floor. "You all know what happened. The whole country knows. But today, we are not here to point fingers. We are here to make a change." He looked at Charlotte and gestured for her to speak. "For 15 years, she began, my job has been to ensure that every aircraft taking off from American soil complies with safety standards. But there is something that no technical guideline can enforce: moral conscience. Yesterday, an administrative error exposed a technical flaw, but it was arrogance, the lust for power, prejudice that almost turned this error into a tragedy." The hangar was in absolute silence. She continued in a firm voice, "I don't want to be remembered as the woman who stopped 7 planes. I want to be remembered as the professional who helped ensure that none of them ever fall. And it starts with each one of you. Not just checking systems, but recognizing people." In the end, Charlotte received applause that began timidly, but soon became deafening. Some applauded standing. Others, moved, simply lowered their heads, reflecting. In the following days, the news spread. The FAA had concluded its audit, and Sky Nation Airways had been authorized to resume flights. But before the clearance, a new clause was included in the compliance agreement. All of the company's crews would have to undergo mandatory training in ethics, diversity, and aviation authority protocols, a direct legacy of Dr. Brennan. Online, thousands of comments accompanied the headlines. Some celebrated her courage, others the president's stance in acknowledging the mistake. But most said something simple, almost unanimous. A woman saved a plane and taught a company how to fly again. While the country debated, Charlotte returned to her discreet daily routine, traveling between workshops and hangars, reviewing spreadsheets and safety instructions. But this time, something had changed. Not in her job, nor in her routine, but in the way others looked at her. In the eyes of every pilot, mechanic, and attendant, there was respect. The same respect that she had always demanded, and which had now finally been earned. On the night the first Dreamliner took off again, Charlotte watched from her hotel balcony as the cold wind whipped against her face. The aircraft's lights streaked across the sky, reflecting off the glass of distant buildings. She smiled, not for victory, but for relief. Because for a moment I knew that justice, even when born from confrontation, can be the most human of flights. And as the plane gained altitude, one truth became fixed in the air. Not all heroes wear uniforms, and not all rescues happen in the sky. Some begin with a simple phrase spoken firmly, "I'm not going to give up my seat." There are stories that remind us that courage isn't just about facing danger, it's about standing firm when everyone expects you to give in. Doctor. Charlotte Brennan's journey demonstrates that dignity and respect are non-negotiable values. The true power lies not in titles, wealth, or privileges, but in the serenity of those who know they are on the right side of truth. How many times in life are we pushed to give up what is ours, what we have achieved with effort, just to please others or avoid confrontation? And how often does silence in the face of injustice turn into complicity? This story is a reminder that every voice that rises up, even alone, can change the course of things. Now I want to know from you, where are you watching from? Comment below and tell me what struck you most about this story. If this message resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to follow new stories of courage, truth, and overcoming adversity. Because in the end, what unites us is not the flights we take, but the truths we have the courage to defend.